Now that we've talked about what a master node is, let's look at the cluster we have and how we can design it to have a master and dedicated data nodes. So we'll talk about the default configuration, we'll designate node roles, and I'll show you the different options you can have when you're designing your cluster. So the default configuration that Elasticsearch gets installed with, each node is what I call a generalist. So they're pre-configured, they're ready to go. They can be a data node, they could be a master node, they'll be an indexing node, they'll do it all. So this is a way that you can just get a cluster up and running very quickly. Typically you'll do this in a development environment, QA environment, or you could do this in a production environment, depending on the complexity of your cluster, the size of your cluster and whatnot. Depending on, budget and how much you want to design the cluster, you can definitely and probably should be adding dedicated master nodes. That way you can add indexing nodes and data nodes. So those nodes, that's all they have to worry about. They don't have to worry about being a master node every now and then, so you can have consistent indexing and search results. One thing that is a lesson learned, and you'll read it in the documentation, or even if you watch videos from Elastic on how do I determine the size and the layout of my cluster. There is so much that is custom and has to do with your application and the data that you're using. All depends on, do you want to make it indexing heavy so you're indexing a ton of data? Do you want to make it read faster so you're going to handle search faster, so you're going to use more replicas in a bigger cluster for reading? There's a lot of trial and error. There's some math involved to look at how much data is going to be going across the network to make sure you're not oversaturating any sort of network pipes. There's just a ton that you have to learn and have to experiment with probably before you want to roll out your production environment. I know the last Elasticsearch cluster I put together with, at the beginning, I think we had about 6 very large AWS EC2 instances, but changing the mappings and the configuration of my indexes just took time to get it so I felt like it was right. Starting general default settings is great, but I was in such a high speed, high velocity application that I needed to heavily focus on indexing. So I had to use a lot of CPU and a lot of different machines to get the throughput that I needed. There are different node types that we've talked about, and these can mix and match. You can have a master node. A master only will be tasked with coordinating the rest of your cluster. You'll typically want 3 of those, so you can have a little backup in case one goes down or needs some maintenance. That master capability can move to another node almost seamlessly. You can have a data node, so the data node is the thing that is doing the indexing and the querying and data storage. So your data nodes are typically a higher CPU, higher memory, and a lot of disk, depending on how much data you're going to keep and for how long. Then you can have an ingest node. So these nodes, they don't store data, they don't do master coordination, but they take your data and they process it so it can be stored into a Lucene index. So these are high CPU horsepower. This you can offload your indexing, you can separate it from your data nodes, which you can use for searching. There are a lot of configurations here. I just went to the recent Elasticsearch conference a couple weeks ago, and they even talked about, we talked about the machine learning XPack capability. They talked about having a machine learning only node, the thing that'll do the big number crunching for your data, so you can offload your machine learning processes into their own host. So again, you can isolate that from your indexing and your searching. So when you're building out a production environment or a redundant environment, 3 is the magic number, really. So the first and easiest thing, as I just showed you in these videos, is to have 3 generalist or jack-of-all-trades nodes. These are indexing nodes, they're data nodes, they're master nodes, all in one. These are the default configurations out of the box. You put 3 of these together and they'll run really, really well together. And every time you add another node, you will scale in a predictable way. The other option that I've used in a production environment is to have those 3 master nodes. Your 3 master nodes, 2 of them will just sit idle most of the time, and that's okay. They're there for when the first master needs maintenance or needs to fail over to one of them. And then you just have data nodes, and you just keep adding data nodes, assuming they're being used efficiently. You just keep adding data nodes as your your volume and your scale increases, so you can support more indexing, more querying. So in our next and last video, we're going to do a quick overview of the different software as a service options that I've seen for Elasticsearch that you might want to look into if you don't want to build your own cluster, if you don't want to maintain your own cluster.